Hey guys, it's Bunny here, and today I want to talk a little bit about Kazakusan, its treasures, and give you a little bit of a tier list, help you improve your game on the pick order of the treasures depending on the situation. Kazakusan has kind of taken Hearthstone by storm since the release of the mini set. It's been by far the most impactful card. It was in the Spell Druid winning lineup for the Masters Tour. Then on HS Replay, we have very high. We have, of course, a lot of different Kazakusan druids. We even have right now a deck that I made quite shortly after the expansion came out, which is a Kazakusan warrior, which is a control warrior, but instead of playing a charge shell, it plays the Kazakusan as a finisher, tries to stall out the game until you can play Kazakusan. So there's also been some pretty prominent decks, and I wanted to give you a little bit more of a guide on how to improve your treasure picking, what my personal favorites are, what I think are the best treasures in the game in general, and yeah, just overall how to improve playing around and with Kazakusan. So let's get right into it. And this wouldn't be a bunny video if the answer for the start wouldn't be it depends. Nothing is absolute. There is no this is the best no matter what. Do this, right? There's always a little bit of there's contextualized information, and we always have to take that information into account. But don't worry, I'm gonna give you 3 tier lists at the end of this video, where I have 1 tier list for each of the major situations. I'm gonna talk about how I get to these tier lists. If you want to understand more in depth, if you want to just go to the end of the video and copy paste it, sure. But you're going to have more success, and we're going to be better at picking those treasures if you watch through the whole video. So, all right, let's just get right to it. First up, most OP treasure in current standard, I think, is Book of the Dead. Book of the Dead is just so insane because it clears the board and it goes phase. So you can set up for a lot of other treasures that might not be as good. Usually, clears a lot of the boards that, especially Druid, has a bunch of problems with when they're being built against you, and usually comes down for 0. That means you can also tempo swing with your other treasures that you can pick alongside it and get yourself a huge advantage, finish your opponent out. Book of the Dead, for me, the tier S treasure. Second on the list, also always pick treasure, I think, is Locust. Locust is just, you have 4 times 14 damage, and there's hardly any deck in Hearthstone that can outlast that. Warrior with Rancor might get there, but it's a lot of pressure, it takes a lot of removal, buys you like a lot of time to be able to set up. So Locust, my second highest treasures. And then I'm already going to get into treasures that are maybe not 100% like the most preferred treasure. And here I have Ancient Reflections, which is the 4 mana spell that summons 1/1 copies with a minion that you choose. I think that treasure is really, really strong because, like, as soon as you find any good target for it, it's absolutely insane. To me, in duels, this was one of the most broken treasures because, especially how sick it is with Death Rattle, how crazy it interacts with Vax Rager, that we're gonna get to in a second. Absolutely bonkers treasure, in my opinion. Super, super strong. Sets up so many things, so many powerful things together with other cards. Absolutely love that card. Next up, we have Want of Disintegration. And Want of Disintegration, I put this high because it's a really good it's a good counter treasure to some of the more aggressive treasures like Ancient Reflections or Wax Rager. It also just is really good at coming back. It's really good against Priest. It's really good against all the boards that you usually can't handle. That is true for Warrior and Druid, which I'm going to mention as the main Kazakusan classes, because Warrior doesn't have Silence and Druid doesn't have Mass AoE unless you discover something like Book. That's why Want of Disintegration is super high on my overall tier list. Then next up, Vox Rager. 3 mana, 5/1 Death Rattle, resummon this minion. Super bonkers. If it doesn't get silenced, most decks don't have silence. This will win you the game over some time. But of course, that is just the overplayer tier list. We'll get to situations where you might not want to pick Vox Rager later. Then I have Canopic Jars, which is 3 mana, give you Death Rattle, give you minions Death Rattle, summon a random legendary minion. That card originally used to be 4 mana in duels. And then I got nerfed to 5 mana because it was so OP with some of the passives that there are in the game. And now it's in standard for 3 mana. It's crazy good. And that card is just makes boards that are so impossible to remove for a lot of decks. The only reason why this card isn't any higher in the tier list is because a lot of the games that you play on ladder, you have to race your opponent for the finish, and Canopic Jars does quite do that. But in overall power level, that card is insane. Absolutely tier S. So that concludes my tier S for me. And then I'm going to go to what I consider to be tier A. And tier A is, for me, the Boombots, the Dr. Boom's Boombox. It's 4 mana, 7/7 Boombots. It's a lot of pressure. It's board presence that needs to be removed while being burst at the same time. But oftentimes in the part of the game, you don't actually... This fills up your board and you don't have that many other things to play alongside it unless you're having a removal turn. That's why I think it's a tier A treasure. Second tier A treasure for me is Gnomish Army Knife, which is 5 mana, give a minion Rush, Wind Fury, Divine Shield, Lifesteal, Poisonous, Taunt, and Stealth. That card in duels used to be give your minion Charge, right? It used to be the full Alakir, but you know, also Lifesteal, Poisonous, and Stealth. So they changed it to Rush, so you can't just, you know, play one big minion and then just like charge your opponent in the face. That card I think is still pretty good because it's like one of the most, it's a really good essential removal tool while providing you with a lot of health gain with a lot of the other treasures. So there's a bunch of decks like Burn Shaman or whatnot that will try to close out the game by bursting you down, kind of taking advantage of you not having as much healing or you not having as much removal. And this card kind of fills both slots. It's removal and it's healing, and it combos well together with other treasures. That's why I put it very high on the list. I think it's an amazing card. Goes really well with Vox Rager or Ancient Reflections or just like any of the like lower tier cards. This card makes a lot better. It's really good utility card. Next up, we'll go to kind of like the B tier, which I think is like situational cards, which by themselves, they're completely insane. But they're not as good as the ones before, and they don't quite work by themselves. So first up, I here have Staff of Scales, which is insane removal tool, especially good for druids when they're trying to come back in the turn after they play Kazakusan. This is a cheap and amazing top deck, which clears your opponent's board oftentimes. And like, or might give you like some active pressure yourself, set up for multiple turn board removals. And yeah, this card really, really powerful. Then I have the Annoyer Horn, which just fills your board with annoying minions. So you get a bunch of like 1/2 Divine Shield taunts, or 2/4 or 3/4 Divine Shield taunts. Anyway, you get a bunch of Divine Shield taunts. So against any deck that wants to go face, this card is of course amazing. Only downside is the board locks you and it doesn't push any damage. Can be removed by Warrior, is a little bit slow against some cards, but I think still really, really good card. Still a tier B treasure to me. Then I have Embers of Ragnaros, which is 10 mana, shoot 3 fireballs at random enemies that deal 8 damage each. So this card, of course, is an amazing finisher if you play against a passive deck that just tries to remove everything you can. But if you're in a board lock battle, it's really, really bad. One thing that makes it a lot better is if you already discovered Book of the Dead, you can go Book of the Dead to clear the board, and then Embers of Ragnaros will go face, and this card will be a lot better. This card, of course, is also a lot better against like decks like Mozaki Mage, but then you have to you know, get to 10 mana. So that's why I put it in tier B, because I think it's a very situational card. It has the opportunity to be absolute bonkers together with other treasures you discovered, but it can also be one of the worst treasures to discover in your if you're in a board lock battle um, with other Kazakusan decks, for example. Next up, 3 mana puzzle box. Transform all minions to random ones that cost 3. The reason why I think this is a little bit of an underrated treasure is because this has two effects. You can, first of all, you can use Ancient Reflections together with high stated minion to gain you a lot of stats, or you can use it with your already existing board to make really good minions. Even if you get a bunch of 1 HP minions and you transform them, you get some 4-drops and you can have some crazy interactions. You can have some really interesting board states that are somewhat hard to remove for your opponent. And then second of all, and I think this is a very underestimated part of Puzzle Box, is Puzzle Box is essentially also a silence. So for OP treasures like Wax Rager or a huge board from your opponent with Contopic Jarts, if you don't have Wand of Disintegration, Puzzle Box can also be a defensive tool that you then follow up with something like Book of the Dead. So you transform the minions first, you hope there's not too many death battles in there, you weaken their board, and then you clear it. And so taking both these aspects together, even if for both of the purposes it's trying to achieve, it's not the best card in either one of these categories. If you take it together, it still comes out to be a really good card. So Puzzle Box, to me, definitely tier B card. And now we get to like the lesser good treasures. Yeah, well, I'll just name them quickly, and if there's something that I think is unusual, I'll point it out. So in tier C, we have Pure Cold, which is 5 mana, deal 8 damage to the enemy hero and freeze it. It's a good finisher, but very dependent on other cards you have. Then you have Vampiric Phoenix, destroy a minion, restores health to your hero. Good reactive card if you're like trying to stay alive, you're playing against a burn deck. Good card, but can also be really, really useless. The Exerciser, 1 mana, 3/3, silence any minion attacked by this weapon. That card, of course, is, to me personally, it's just a Wax Rager counter. I also put it in tier C because it can just be extra damage. You know, oftentimes you have like Locust, which is 8 mana and 14 damage, and then the Exerciser is an extra 3 damage for 1 mana that the opponent might sometimes not see coming. So I think it's a worthy pick. I think it's one of the better treasures in that tier. Then you have Looming Presence, 3 mana, draw 2 cards, gain 4 armor. The only thing that's good about this is it draws you more treasures. If you have OP treasures, you want to get to the OP treasures. You want to get through your deck really quickly. Next up, we have Krusty the Crustacean. 3 mana, 3/3, destroy a minion, gain its attack and health. Of course, decent comeback tool, works together really well with the Gnomish Army Knights. That's what I was saying. There's a lot of cards that are like kind of but if you have the Gnomish Army Knife, they become a lot better. That is why I think the Army Knife, even though it doesn't look amazing, I think it's a really good pick overall. So, but the card by itself is kind of meh. Then we have Banana Split, which is 5 mana, give a friendly minion +2/+2, summon 2 copies of it. This treasure is just super, super slow. Like, it works amazing if you have Wax Rager, but Wax Rager will win a lot of games by itself. You don't need the Banana Split on it, and a lot of other treasures are just better than Banana Split. Then we have Clockwork Assistance, which is 3 mana, 1/1, has +1/+1 for each spell you've cast this game. By the way, this is an aura, so if you play Barrow on this, its HP will be reduced to 1, but it's a 1/1 with an aura effect, so nothing will actually happen. Equality, Librum of Justice, all these cards won't be able to kill or reduce Clockwork Assistant 1 down HP, which is the kind of cool thing about the auras in duels. That card, like I said, again, good with Gnomish Army Knife, really slow by itself. I think usually doesn't help you win out games because against fast decks, it's not fast enough. Against slow decks, they run too much removal. That's why I don't think it's a good treasure. Next up, we have Booba. Booba is a 5 mana, 8/8 Battlecry, summon 6/1/1 Bloodhounds with rush to attack an enemy minion. I think it's also much worse treasure than all the others, but it can be really good with Cantopic Jars if you want to build a big board. So it's like only a treasure that you really pick if you already have something else good. 8 mana, Holy Book, silence and destroy minions, summon a 10/10 copy of it. I think that this treasure is basically just complete garbage. But certain classes don't have access to silence. So this is just like, this is just an answer to Vox Rager. Like, it's a really expensive answer to Vox Rager. That's why this card is like playable. I think otherwise it wouldn't be playable at all. And then I'm just gonna mention the last cards because they're like complete trash. We have the Blade of Keldelar, which I also put in DRC because by the same logic as the Exerciser, this can sometimes be 2 surprise damage. So I think it's sometimes pickable over some of the worst options. This is my last option in DRC. And then, of course, you get the chance of making the OP Kelderar weapon, which isn't even quite that OP in Constructed as it used to be in duels. One of the interesting things about the card is in duels it used to start in your hand, so it used to be even better. But I think Blade of Keldelar is much better to pick than Hilt of Keldelar. And then in tier D we have all the garbage treasures, which is Necrotic Poison, Beastly Beauty, Mutilating Injection, Spyglass, Grimmer Patron, which is probably the worst treasure of them all, and Hyper Blaster. Just never pick these if you can avoid it. Like, just never pick these cards. They're basically complete trash. Unless you're playing like a cycle deck and you want like cheap treasures. But other than that, these cards are complete trash and you always avoid them. That was my overall tier list, and let's go into like there's 2 main cases. I don't want to make this video like super duper long, so I'll go into 2 main cases and say what the main differences are. If you are being the aggressor, that means you are the first one that's playing Kazakusan, and you are going to try to win against a control deck or a slower deck. So let's say you're a druid or warrior, you're trying to win against another druid, another warrior, Muzaki mage, Owlock, something passive, just generally something passive. The tier list changes a little bit, and in my always pick, I have at the very top, I now have Locust over the book, just because it's more damage over time. So I've got Locust book, then the boom bots, because they do a lot of face damage. Like you will see, these 3 treasures are at the top now because they do face damage, and it's very important to produce more face damage. Vox Rager still at the top because none of these decks run silence, and if you play against a slow deck, Vox Rager will end the game. Then I put Canopic Jars very, very high, just because they make the good thing about Canopic Jars against all the slower matchups or all the slower decks or all the decks that don't run enough removal is you will be number one, it makes your book resistance against Book of the Dead from other people or other removals, and it makes all the shitty treasures that you can pick a lot better, and I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, good picks. Amber of Ragnaros, the 8 mana Firebolts face, of course. If you're playing against passive decks, against deck you want to kill, 24 burst, pretty good. We'll like it. We pick it. Very, very good pick. Annoyer board, Annoyer Horn is really good in the board-centric matchups, like where you don't need to kill them immediately. Like if you play against other druids or warrior, that card's really, really sick because it takes multiple removals to get rid of it if they can do it at all. Against like OTKDH, for example, it instantly wins the game if you have to be the proactive deck. There's a few decks where you play this card and the game just kind of ends. Quest Stroke, all these kind of decks that just don't properly get through big Dimensional Taunts. And then you got situational picks, which I think is Booba. Booba is a good pick if you have Canopic Jars. Sometimes you pick it in preparation for Canopic Jars, but this is kind of the combo if you are the aggressor. So all this tier list that I'm talking about now is the aggressor. Banana Split, really good with Vox Rager. That's why I think it's a pickable card. I took Ancient Reflection down quite a lot in terms of like where it's supposed to go on the tier list because you don't have that many targets, and if you don't already hit the Vox Rager or legendaries or something like that, it's not quite as good. Doesn't do as much by itself if you want to be aggressor. I put up Pure Cold quite a lot. Put it in situational picks as well, just because against few decks you just need extra face damage. Face damage is much more. Like 5 mana 8 is nice. Then I have Want of Disintegration, that of course is super situational. It depends. If you expect your opponent to be picking um, Kazakusan treasures as well, that card of course becomes mega OP, or if you're playing against the Miracle Priest, that card becomes OP. Yeah, if you just need removal, this is of course still the best card. Staff of Skills kind of fills the same role, but is a little bit worse. It doesn't put enough power on the board to be really worth mentioning as an aggressive tool. To me, okay picks, if you're the aggressor, are the Army Knife, because it can just be like, can be additional burst, especially really good on Wax Ragers and other things like that, but not aside, not even close compared to before. Same in tier D, I put Looming Presence for card draw, Book, if you need some removal, Box, if you have already reflections and you think you can make some really funky plays. And then Clockwork Assistance, even though that's my worst pick of these, because that card's just too slow. Like you're just too slow. If you're the aggressor, like it's either gonna get frozen in this meta, or you're going to get killed before you can actually connect with it. This card's only really good if you have the Army Knife, if you need to come back. But that's like, yeah, in a tier list where we're talking about being the aggressor, these are bad. And all the other treasures are complete garbage, so don't even think about picking them. You can consult the tier list. I'm not going to go over them again, because they're all so bad that if you want to make a little difference between them, you can look at the tier list. But yeah, they're really not worth it at all. And then we have, lastly, if you're kind of like the passive player, if you're trying to answer, and this tier list is true if you're the second person to play Kazakusan. That's where this tier list becomes like super relevant. Is if you're the second person to play Kazakusan, this is the tier list for you. Like one of the Disintegration best card, Ancient Reflections, Turbo Nuts. Like you copy like one Vox Rager, insane, because they might not have picked removal treasures first. Book of the Deck, still the nuts. Locust is still really, really good, but not quite as good. Sometimes you don't even get the time to play them. But like Wand of Disintegration, Ancient Reflections, super, super insane. Still, Canopic Jars, I think, are really, really good still, because make any like passive removal treasure, put jars on them, and yeah, you're good to go. Like, even if you're the second person. Because remember, even if you're like kind of passive, even if you're like kind of trying to hold your opponent back, you still need a way to win the game. So that's why I include Locust in this tier list quite high, because it'll still win you the game. And yeah, Canopic Jars, if you have a board full of legendaries and your opponent doesn't, you're going to win the long game. Boombots also very high. Denartron, they make boards. Vox Rager I put down a little bit, because if you're trying to be like replying to what your opponent does, Vox Rager just like kind of 3 mana do nothing. Especially in a Battle of the Treasures. In a Battle of the Treasures, Vox Rager is not very good. It's gonna get silenced. It's gonna get copied. Your opponent's gonna have a field day on it. The main differences I want to point out, I'll link you the tier list. I'll show you the tier list right here, because I didn't think it's worth to talk about like all the little differences back and forth. Is the major winners from this passive to me is Ancient Reflections. Like I said, it's so OP as a response to other people's treasures. Wand of Disintegration. Puzzle Box, I think, is also a big winner, just because it's math silence. Your opponent makes a board with like Ancient Reflections, Canopic Jars, something super huge. You can Puzzle Box and then remove it. It's like, yeah, it's this flexibility that I talked about earlier. I think Puzzle Box is a big winner. Really, really huge loser from being passive or being the second guy to play treasures is Embers of Ragnaros. Because if you're the second guy to play treasures, your opponent is very likely you're going to build super crazy boards, and then shooting 8 fireballs at super crazy minions is entirely useless. Again, exception to the rule, if you have Book of the Dead, book, fireballs kills everything. Yeah, fireballs always good with book. Pick fireballs with book, okay? Yeah, also like pure cold and stuff like that. Just cards that generally don't do anything on board. really, really bad. Exerciser and Holy Book are good because they're good answers to Vox Rager, and they will win the board battles over a long time if you play it smart. So those are kind of the winners of the Kazakusan board battle, and the direct damage spells to me are the negative ones. And then the garbage treasures are still the garbage treasures. I'm sorry, they're bad. Don't pick them. Thank you guys for watching. If you like that, please let me know what you want the next guy to be on in the comments below this video. I would appreciate it a lot. As always, catch me during the week on Twitch while I rage at how good my opponent's treasures were and how bad mine were. Just kidding. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you around.